On a warm night in Broward County, Florida, a newly married couple drifted across dark water under a calm sky. 22-year-old Anita Lopez Keane was 4 months pregnant and only 3 months into what she believed would be a happy life. Beside her was her husband, Michael Keane, a polished businessman, more than a decade older than her. With them was Michael's closest friend, Vince Mabry. By the end of that night, Anita was gone, and the man she trusted most was already shaping the story that would bury the truth. The call for help came from a dock after midnight. Michael's voice was frantic as he reported that his wife was missing from the boat. He said Anita had not been feeling well earlier in the evening. According to him, she had gone down into the cabin to lie down while he and Vince stayed above deck talking. Hours later, when the boat returned to shore, Anita was nowhere to be found. She was not in the cabin, she was not on the deck. The only explanation he offered was that she must have fallen overboard somewhere between the open ocean and the marina. The search began immediately. The water stretched across miles of darkness and the window for survival narrowed with every passing hour. Anita was pregnant, drifting somewhere in the Atlantic if Michael's story was true. Boats and aircraft swept across the area, tracing the route back from offshore. There was no sign of her. No cry for help, no body in the water, no clue to tell anyone where she had gone. For Anita's family, those first hours felt unreal. She had just begun the life she had always wanted. She was young, beautiful, hopeful, and newly married. She had dreamed of love, children, and stability, and it had all seemed close enough to touch. Now that future had been swallowed by the sea, leaving only confusion and fear behind. Anita Lopez had been born in Cuba and came to Miami with her family in 1971. Like many who left behind hardship and control, her parents wanted freedom and opportunity for their children. In Florida, Anita grew into the life they had imagined for her. She loved dancing, loved fashion, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who expected more from life. She did local modeling, worked an office job at a tractor company, and held tight to the idea that one day she would have a family of her own. She was a romantic in the purest sense. She believed in love at first sight. She believed the right man would see her and know. Michael Keane seemed to be that man. Raised in North Carolina, he had built the image of a success story long before Anita entered his life. He was educated, charming, disciplined, and ambitious. By the time he settled in Miami, he was doing well selling commercial signs. He had a good house, a nice car, a boat, and the easy confidence of someone who knew how to impress people. When he met Anita through business, he saw exactly what he wanted. She was young, beautiful, trusting, and eager to build a future. He courted her quickly and intensely. Their relationship moved fast. Michael took Anita out, introduced her to friends, surrounded her with the kind of lifestyle she had once only imagined. He bought gifts, paid attention to small details, and gave her every reason to believe she had found someone solid and dependable. To Anita, he seemed loving and generous. To those around them, they looked perfect together. He had money and polish, she had grace and warmth. They looked like a couple stepping into a bright future. After only a few months, Michael asked Anita's family for permission to marry her. The engagement was everything she had hoped for. She had always imagined a large Cuban wedding, full of family, music, and celebration. Michael pushed for something smaller. Anita gave in. In August 1981, they married in a modest ceremony. Even so, she glowed that day. She was thrilled to be a wife, and soon after the wedding, she shared even bigger news. She was pregnant. That should have been the beginning of their happiest chapter. Anita talked about motherhood with excitement. She wanted to build a home, prepare for the baby, and settle fully into married life. But beneath the outward calm, something darker had already taken hold. Michael had not married Anita for love. He had chosen her as part of a plan. Long before Anita vanished, Michael had formed a cold, private ambition. He wanted to retire young and live off money that did not belong to him. His idea was simple in design and monstrous in practice. He would find a young woman, win her trust, marry her, ensure her life, and then make her death look accidental. Anita became the person he selected for that plan. Every date, every promise, every smile, and every word of devotion moved toward that single goal. The signs were there, though Anita could not see them for what they were. She adored Michael's generosity, but after the wedding she noticed how carefully he controlled money. He did not want to spend much on the baby. Ordinary purchases became small points of tension. At the same time, he showed no hesitation when it came to life insurance. He pushed for a large policy on Anita and their unborn child. To him, it was protection. To Anita's mother, it looked like danger. Anita signed anyway, convinced her husband loved her and only wanted to provide for their future. There was another strain inside the home. Michael's best friend Vince Mabry lived with them. Anita never liked the arrangement. She wanted a marriage, not a household with a permanent third presence. Michael and Vince were inseparable. Michael bought Vince things, loaned him money, and kept him close in a way that gave him deep influence over the younger man. Anita wanted Vince gone, especially with a baby on the way. Eventually, he did leave the house, but he did not leave Michael's orbit. He remained loyal, dependent, and trapped in a relationship Michael knew how to control. By then, Michael had already been discussing how Anita would die. One plan involved pushing her from a building, but that idea was abandoned. The better option in his mind was the water. At sea, distance erased witnesses, waves removed evidence. A drowning at night could pass as tragedy. Anita was pregnant, trusting, and still deeply in love with him. Michael believed he could do it without consequence. He drew Vince into the plan. Vince later admitted that Michael directed the scheme and pressured him into helping. Michael had leverage over him through money, housing, and fear. Vince believed refusal would bring ruin or violence into his own life. So when the day came, he went along. On the final boat trip, the three of them went out together, as if it were nothing more than an evening on the water. The ocean was calm. The atmosphere seemed casual. There was no clear warning that Anita was sailing toward death. At some point during the trip, Michael made his move. He came up behind his pregnant wife and pushed her into the water. Then he kept the boat away from her. In the darkness, Anita was left alone in open water, watching the boat that should have saved her circle beyond her reach. The man she had married, the father of her unborn child, let her drown. He did not throw her a line. He did not stop the boat and pull her back aboard. He watched as the distance widened and her chance of survival disappeared. Beside him, Vince remained part of the nightmare. By the time they returned to shore, Anita was gone and the performance began. Michael called for help as though the loss had just been discovered. He repeated that Anita had been resting in the cabin. He acted stunned that she was no longer there. Vince matched his account. Both men told the same story, and for a time that consistency held the case in place. There were only 3 people on that boat. 2 came back. Both described an accident. Anita's body was missing. Without her remains, there was no direct proof of murder. The search went on for 4 days before it was suspended. The ocean had given nothing back. Anita's family moved through shock, prayer, and unbearable grief. Her mother began to break under the weight of uncertainty. Without a body, the loss refused to settle into anything final. Hope lingered where it should not have, and that made the pain even harder. The family held a memorial and asked everyone to wear white, clinging to the idea of peace because there was nothing else left to hold. Michael appeared grief-stricken. He cried. He looked withdrawn. On the surface, he behaved like a man devastated by the loss of his wife and unborn child. The boat itself offered little immediate contradiction. There were no obvious signs of a struggle. The open stern and low side rails made it possible for someone to go overboard unnoticed. Anita's relatives did not suspect Michael at first. He was charming, smooth, and believable. That was exactly what had made him dangerous from the beginning. Attention also turned briefly toward Vince because of the awkward triangle inside the marriage. Anita had disliked him living with them. He had depended heavily on Michael. Still, suspicion alone was not enough. The years began to pass. Anita remained missing. Her case drifted into the cold stillness that often follows an unsolved death. For her family, time did not heal anything. It only deepened the damage. Her father lost weight. Her mother's health collapsed. The family carried the torment of not knowing the full truth, even though in their hearts they understood Anita was dead. 3 years later, everything changed with a phone call. A relative of Michael's, Matthew Keane, reached out with a chilling claim. He said Anita's disappearance had never been an accident. It had been murder planned from the start. He demanded money in exchange for what he knew, but the information itself was enough to reopen the buried horror of that night. The moment that accusation surfaced, the old story began to crack. When Vince was confronted again, the truth rose quickly. The confidence drained from him. Then the fear that had held him in place for years gave way to confession. He admitted he had participated in a homicide. He said Michael had designed the plan, chosen the method, and used threats and control to keep him obedient. The story of the accidental fall vanished in an instant. In its place stood a deliberate killing carried out for insurance money. The full shape of Michael's scheme was now impossible to ignore. Anita had not been a beloved wife lost in a terrible mishap. She had been the target of a long calculated fraud. Michael had not stumbled into tragedy, he had created it. He had selected a trusting young woman, built a romance around her, guided her into marriage, taken out insurance, and then erased her life before she could become anything more than a payout. When Michael was finally found, he was living under another name in another city. The pattern around him looked familiar. He was engaged again. A third person was once more part of the household arrangement. Life insurance had entered the conversation again. The same machinery appeared to be rebuilding itself around a new woman. Anita had not been a terrible exception inside an otherwise normal life. She had been proof of how Michael operated. His trial laid out the hidden structure of the case in stark detail. The testimony showed that the murder was not driven by a moment of rage, jealousy, or panic. It was an act of cold planning. Michael intended to gain financially from Anita's death and from the death of the child she carried. The amount waiting behind the policy was around $200,000, a sum he believed would set him on the path to early comfort. That number turned every memory of Anita's marriage into something sickening. The small wedding he insisted on, the baby items he hesitated to buy, the eagerness for insurance, each piece fit the same design. The final picture of Anita's last moments was almost unbearable in its cruelty. She had entered marriage believing she was safe. She had believed she was building a family with a man who loved her. Instead, she spent the last stretch of her life in dark ocean water, abandoned by the person she had trusted most. There was no rescue because rescue had never been part of the plan. Her unborn child died with her, taken not by accident but by greed. Michael Keane was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The verdict brought legal closure, but it could not restore what had been taken. Anita's body was never recovered. For her family, that absence remained one of the deepest wounds. There was no grave to visit that held her, no final physical goodbye, only the certainty of what had happened and the lasting ache of how completely she had been betrayed. The emotional damage spread across years. Anita's mother never fully let go of the sense that her daughter was still somehow near, not in body but in spirit. The family spoke of her as a force that still protected them, still held them together through the fracture left by her death. But even love carried forward could not erase the violence of the truth. Anita had given her heart to a man who saw her as an investment. He measured her life against money and chose money. In the end, the case was not only about murder on open water. It was about deception so complete that it wore the face of romance. Michael understood how to mimic devotion, how to perform stability, how to pass as generous and kind while concealing the emptiness underneath. Anita did not vanish because fate turned against her on a quiet night at sea. She vanished because she married a man who had already decided what her life was worth to him. What remained was the memory of who Anita really was before that plan reached her. She was a young woman shaped by hope, by family, by the dream of building something warm and lasting in a new country. She wanted children, laughter, music, beauty, and love. She believed the future could be bright if she gave herself to it fully. That is the life that was stolen from her. Not only her final breath, but every year that should have followed. The water kept its silence, the truth did not. Over time, the lie collapsed under the weight of the design behind it. The frantic call from the dock, the grieving husband, the missing pregnant bride, the empty ocean, the years of uncertainty, the confession, the trial, and the verdict all pointed back to the same brutal reality. Anita Lopez Keane was murdered by Michael Keane, and her death had been arranged long before she ever knew she was in danger. Her story began with the promise of a new life and ended in darkness far from shore. Between those 2 points stood a marriage built on fraud, a child never born, and a family left carrying sorrow that never fully lifted. For Anita, the dream of smooth sailing lasted only a few months. Then the person steering beside her turned the future into a grave with no marker, leaving the truth to surface years later from the depths where he thought it would remain forever.